So you got this guy. You got this guy named Mahmoud Khalil. Mahmoud Khalil, the federal judge, is going to block his deportation of an activist. He's an activist. He's an immigrant with a green card. He's a permanent U.S. resident. He's a permanent U.S. resident. I'm not for sure if he's Palestinian or not. If he's Palestinian, then that means he might have a mother or father, a damn cousin or two, an aunt or an uncle. But somebody says that this Mahmoud Khalil, a legally permanent resident who went through the process, the immigration process, he's here as a will be an American citizen, but right now on a visa. He's a permanent resident. Not a citizen just yet, but he's allowed to be here. Why isn't he allowed to protest Palestine? Oh my God. This shit is so disgusting. It's like they're just itching for a damn genocide. It's like, but we really want to do a genocide. We want to do a genocide in Ukraine and Palestine and Cuba and Mexico, Canada, Greenland, Panama. It makes no damn sense. Because if a person who is here legally doesn't have a right to protest, I'm reminded of Federalist number 45. Federalist paper number 45. Does the Federalist paper number 45 not say the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite? So the government only has a finite amount of power. They only have, A, B, C, D, and F. They don't have G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U. They don't have, the state governments have indefinite, numerous and indefinite, into infinity and beyond. How much power does Utah have? Utah's got all the power to do with their own citizens as they please. Utah has all the damn power. Montana has all the damn power within their borders against their own people. Florida has all the power against their own people. But when it comes to the federal government, the powers that are delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. This has to do with an executive order. How is the damn executive branch allowed to write laws? I thought the legislative branch is supposed to write the laws, and yet the executive branch is writing the laws? And then maybe that's not the point. Maybe they're saying that you don't have a right to protest, right? If he was doing something illegal, but he's not doing anything illegal. Mahmoud Khalil should not be deported. Is there something about freedom, right to protest somewhere in the Constitution? Somewhere I read that we had a right to freedom of speech and a right to peacefully assemble, a right to petition our government for a redress of grievances. Somewhere I read. Yeah, here's the Constitution of the United States. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So we got freedom of religion, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So he's allowed to speak. Protest. Is speech protest? You're allowed to burn the American flag in that. Is that Texas v. Johnson? I keep forgetting these stupid court cases. And then wouldn't that be our common law? Would just be our fucking case law? Common law, we got to read all of fucking English history on top of our own goddamn history? Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. So we have a right to peacefully assemble and a right to petition. Collectively, that First Amendment is called the freedom of expression. So just let this Mahmoud Khalil go. Just because the goddamn Fuhrer wrote a fucking executive order which only has the color of law, it's not written in stone. He's going after an American, a person who's here, a permanent resident. So a soon to be an American, a want to be an American, a will be an American, a permanent resident who came here lawfully. Since he's here lawfully, Is he not a person? Is he not a person? Does it say anything about people? Some of these amendments, like the 14th Amendment, let's take a look at the 14th Amendment. They say that the states can't do things, but then they say that the person, and then some say the citizen. The 14th Amendment, all persons born or naturalized in the U.S., subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the U.S. So he's not a full-blown citizen, but as a permanent resident, I would think he would get some freedoms, some rights, and why would we not want him to protest? You take away the civil liberties, then you go back to natural rights. By taking away their civil liberties, you're actually giving them the right to everybody and everything to do as they please all the time. A right to everything and anything and everybody and anybody and for every time and any time. So it's like, oh, you're not going to give me liberty or give me death. Oh, you're not going to let me have my civil freedoms? Well, I'm just going to take my right to everything and I'm walking. Now I'm going to take my right to everything and I'm getting the hell out of here. Then it says, no state shall make or enforce a law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens. So that has to do with American citizens. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or process. Well, he's a person. Is he not? But then it's all about the state, right? It's not about the federal government. Nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Again, that's about a person. So when it comes to persons, their life, liberty, and property have to be protected, as is their due process, and so is their equal protection. For Americans, well, we get our American freedoms, 100%. There's no doubt about that, right? Of course Americans get American freedoms. Man, this Federalist number 45, it's a doozy. It is a doozy. Let's read let's read from right here. You want to read from right here? I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just seeing things through rose-colored glasses. Had the states complied punctually with the Articles of Confederation, had the states complied punctually, we had a fucking constitution beforehand called the Articles of Confederation. And if the states had complied punctually, if they had complied punctually with the first constitution, or could their compliance have been enforced by as peaceful means as may be used with success towards single persons, our past experience is very far from countenancing an opinion. Countenancing. The hell does countenancing mean? That the state governments would have lost their constitutional powers and have gradually undergone an entire consolidation. So actually the new constitution, the 1789 constitution, keeps the 50 states intact. If we would have kept on going with the fucking Articles of Confederation, they would have dissolved all the damn states and would have just been a fucking union of states. Confederates hate fucking unions. Corporations and scabs hate fucking unions. But American, true blue, strong Americans, like Abraham Lincoln, he loves the union. State governments would have lost their constitutional power under the fucking Articles of Confederation. So, with the U.S. Constitution, the state governments get to keep their constitutional powers and have gradually undergone an entire consolidation to maintain that such an event would have ensued would be to say at once that the existence of the state government is incompatible with any system whatever that accomplishes the essential purposes of union. Now, some people might say, well, the brand new Constitution, they have a new power. They're going to regulate commerce. That's true. The Articles of Confederation did not give the power of the Union the power to regulate commerce. But that seems to be an addition which few oppose, and from which no apprehensions are entertained. The powers relating to war and peace, armies and fleets, treaties and finance, with the other more considerable powers, are all vested in the existing Congress by the Articles of Confederation. The proposed change does not enlarge these powers, it only substitutes a more effectual mode of administering them. The change relating to taxation may be regarded as the most important, yet the present Congress has complete authority to require the states indefinite supplies of money for the common defense and general welfare, as the future Congress will have to require them of individual citizens, and the latter will be no more bound than the state themselves have been to pay the quotas respectively taxed on them. Did you hear what I just said? The brand new Constitution changes how taxation works. Instead of getting taxes from the states, now you can require taxes from individual citizens for the general welfare and common defense. We need to keep the Articles of Confederation. This damn new Constitution is going to fuck us all over. So when it comes to the few and defined powers of the Constitution versus the state governments, the former will be exercised principally on external objects. So what do we have the American government for? Just for external objects, such as war, peace, negotiation, foreign commerce. That's why we got an American government. It's a union of states. And since it's a union of states, that means the states have all the powers, and the federal government has a few powers. That's Federalist 45. The states have all the powers, and the federal government has a few powers. The powers of the federal government are few and defined, and the powers of the state governments are numerous and indefinite, infinite. It's just like what Einstein said about knowledge and imagination. Knowledge is finite, imagination encircles the globe and beyond. Imagination just goes on and on and on, my friend, into infinity. So that means the federal government has few and defined powers. The state governments, whatever you can imagine. The state governments have all the powers that you could imagine. But the powers of the federal government are few and defined, as defined in the enumerated powers. Enumerated powers are the specific powers. If you read all the enumerated powers of Congress, it's called the laundry list of Congress's chores, because there's like 20 to 30 powers that Congress has. And so therefore the powers that Congress has, the Supreme Court nor the presidency has. You want to read some of these powers? To borrow money on the credit of the United States, that's a power of Congress. To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. So that means Congress has a right to a uniform rule of naturalization. So let's go back to Mahmoud Khalil. The laws on the books about immigration, he came over, he's legal, he's got a green card, he's a permanent resident. He's here, forever, for as long as he wants to be. As, a non-citizen national, a non-citizen visitor, a non-citizen immigrant, but a person who's going to work on his citizenship. Where do the laws come from for naturalization? Congress. Congress has the right to establish those laws. This fucking Fuhrer is just goddamn issuing a bunch of executive orders. Why is he issuing a bunch of executive orders? Because he wants to write the laws. And he wants to break the Constitution. And he wants to be a dictator. And on the subject of bankruptcies. So who writes the laws for bankruptcies? Who writes the laws for who could be naturalized in America? Congress does. Congress does. Congress also could coin money, fix the standard of weights and measures, provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the U.S., to establish post offices and post roads to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors exclusive right to the respective writings and discoveries, and a whole bunch more, to provide and maintain a navy, that's the power of Congress, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Who controls the militia? Congress controls militia. To declare war and grant letters of marque and reprisal. How come AOC hasn't ever granted a single letter of marque and reprisal? What the hell is she doing? She's going to movie theaters. She's voting for the Iron Dome. She don't give a shit about genocide. She's going to kiss Mama Bear's ass. And why push for universal health care? She's just a girl, you know? Shit. It's not like she has any power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. And that's it. To provide for calling forth the militia, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia. Buildings, make the laws necessary and proper. Tribunals inferior to the Supreme. So there's other powers there, but those are the powers of Congress. And that's it. Powers, the Congress don't get any more powers than those. And that's all listed in Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, because the legislature has the most power. The presidency is Article 2. And the Supreme Court, Article 3. There's a reason why our Constitution is structured that way. Because James Madison's a goddamn genius. So both federal governments and state governments can tax. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. The state gets all the powers, infinite amount of powers. He says numerous and indefinite powers. So Utah gets numerous and indefinite powers, indefinite, and Donald, well, his powers are few and defined. Congress, their powers are few and defined. The Supreme Court of the United States of America, their powers are few and defined. There's another part here. Federalist 45. The state government may be regarded as constituent and essential part of the federal government. So the way it was originally organized, there's actually two main parts. But the federal government could not exist without the state governments. The president, the senators, they were required, the state legislatures were actually required. The state legislatures were an important role in the choosing of the senators and the president. The House of Representatives, the only connection that they make is that they come from the wellspring of the people, and so therefore when you run for the House of your state, that's the same people that's going to vote for the U.S. House, and so therefore you're up against that same power. So this paragraph is actually less true today than what it used to be. Because what he was saying from there, that each of the principal branches of the federal government owes its existence more or less to the favor of state governments. But now the only influence is it comes from the same well of people. So the same people that, waste their enthusiasm for their state house rep, they could just as much vote their enthusiasm for that same person or another person for the U.S. House. That's not as strong of an argument. It's good that the federal government was dependent upon the state government, because then the federal government would feel dependent upon the states, and therefore it wouldn't be oppressive to the multitude of states. It says here, the federal government will owe its existence more or less to the favor of the state governments and must consequently feel a dependence which is much more likely to beget a disposition to obsequious. What is obsequious? That's another $10 word. What was that other $10 word? That's like two $10 words in an hour. which is much more likely to beget a disposition too obsequious than too overbearing towards them. On the other side, the component parts of the state government will in no instance be indebted for their appointment to the direct agency of the federal government. That's still true today. So the federal government used to be dependent upon the state government, so therefore they would feel some kind of dependence. They don't have any dependence at all, but neither do the state governments. So before, the federal government needed the state governments, and the state governments never needed the federal governments. Even though the former has changed, the latter is still the same. State governments don't need the fucking federal government. What the fuck does the state of Utah need a goddamn U.S. government for? To add more taxes? To have more police brutality? To make sure we're building even less homes for the homeless? To take more territory away? Let's carry on. Federalist 45. There's a lot of stuff here. The alleged danger from the powers of the Union to the state governments. The alleged danger. Oh no, if we have a union of states, then we might not have states anymore. James Madison says you're always going to have states. You're always going to have the Union. Now this is interesting. We have heard the impious doctrine in the old world that the people were made for kings, not kings for the people. So the people were made for kings. The people are a bunch of dumbass slaves, and we need kings to oppress us. We don't kings who are for, who come from the people, that are of, by, and for the people. Is the same doctrine to be revived in the new, in another shape, that the solid happiness of the people is to be sacrificed to the views of political institutions of a different form? It's too early for politicians to presume on our forgetting that the public good, the real welfare of the great body of the people, is the supreme object to be pursued, and that no form of government whatever has any other value than as it may be fitted for the attainment of this object. Were the plan of the convention adverse to the public happiness, my voice would be reject the plan. Were the union itself inconsistent with the public happiness, it would be abolish the union. In like manner, as far as the sovereignty of the states cannot be reconciled to the happiness of the people, the voice of every good citizen must be, let the former be sacrificed to the latter. How far the sacrifice is necessary has been shown. How far the unsacrificed residue will be endangered is the question before us today. He also mentions the Achaean League and the Lycian Confederacy. In the Achaean League, it is probable that the federal head had a degree and species of power which gave it a considerable likeness to the government framed by the convention. The Lycian Confederacy, as far as its principles and form are transmitted, must have borne a still greater analogy to it. Yet history does not inform us that either of them ever degenerated or tended to degenerate into one consolidated government. The alleged danger from the powers of the Union to the state governments. James Madison, Federalist, paper number 45. If the federal government is to have collectors of revenue, the state governments will have theirs also. And as those of the former will be principally on the sea coast and not very numerous, whilst those of the latter will be spread over the face of the country and will be very numerous, the advantage in this view also lies on the same side. It is true that the Confederacy is to possess and may exercise the power of collecting internal as well as external taxes throughout the states, but it is probable that this power will not be resorted to except for supplemental purposes of revenue, that an option will then be given to the states to supply their quotas by previous collections of their own, and that the eventual collection under the immediate authority of the Union will generally be made by the officers and according to the rules appointed by the several states. So both the state and the federal government have a right to tax internally and externally. Hell, if tariffs are good for America, why wouldn't Utah have a bunch of tariffs on all Montana's goods? Why don't we just have a trade war amongst ourselves? Utah for Utahians only. It put a bunch of tariffs up in Utah so that way everybody in Utah's got to buy Utah. If it doesn't say made in Utah, well then you ain't going to get it unless you pay a fucking major ass tariff. You know, to me, tariff, Donald says tariff is only, he says it's his favorite word, but then he says God and religion. He doesn't mention family or friends or community, which is interesting. But he says that God is number one, religion is number two, and I guess love is number three. But then tariff is his fourth favorite word in the English language. It's my favorite word. Just tariff. Oh, tariff. Fucking tariffs. What a dickhead. Now Canada's not going to buy Kentucky bourbon. The reverberations, we're going to feel those reverberations. The regulation of commerce, it is true, is a new power. But that seems to be an addition which few oppose. And if the states actually complied punctually with the Articles of Confederation, the states would have been dissolved. The federal government protects the states. The way that the Constitution was formed, we're always going to have 50 nifty United States. Until the end of time. Forever and ever. The state is immortal. And as long as the 50 states are going to be immortal, then the union of the states will always be immortal as well. So, to review, Federalist number 45 says that the powers of the federal government, according to the U.S. Constitution of 1789, are few and defined. They only got a couple powers. Congress has a couple powers, Supreme Court's got a couple powers, and the President has a couple powers. Most of their powers have to do with war and peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. The states have the bulk of all the powers. They got the majority of all the powers. When it comes to the states get to run the citizens of their own states, their lives, their liberties, their properties, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state, whereas America gets war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. And they both have the power to tax us. So they're going to get us, whether we're coming or going, we're going to get taxed up the wazoo by Utah and by the United States of America. I'm John Masters, and that's Federalist 45. Straight out of the belly of the beast. Peace!